23rd is our last country in Central Africa, the Central African Republic. Not quite in the center of Africa, central enough. I do, however, find the name a bit clunky, so I'll be using the French Centrafrica. Geography. It might be argued that the Central African Republic actually bleeds into West Africa, like Cameroon, but I'm not going to split hairs about it. The Central African Republic is shaped a bit like a croissant roll. The country's central uplands bridge the plateaus of Cameroon and the northeast of Congo-Kinshasa, separating the waters of the Shari River north and the Congo south. The uplands culminate in the Kari and Bongos mountains on either side, Mount Ngawi capping out at 4,600 feet, 1410 meters. Lying north of the equator and in the interior of Africa, Centrafrica is hot year-round. Wet season about April to October, dry November to March. The country grows progressively drier the further north you move, becoming semi-arid at the tip. In the dry season, cool, dry, and dusty winds blow southwest from the Sahara, called the Harmattan. The very south of the country is covered in the northern extreme of the Congo rainforest, and the very north, the southern extreme of the Sahel shrub and woodland. But the majority of Centrafrica is covered in savannas, the more closed Congolian mosaic, and the more open Sudan, home to endangered species like chimpanzees and Bongo antelope. First inhabitants. Inhabited to one degree or another for as long as there have been humans, by the close of the Ice Age, 3 races of men crystallize in Centrafrica. We've spent a lot of time with our buddies, the Congo Pygmies. In Cameroon, we met the ancient West Africans, and in Congo, the Nilo-Sahelians of the Nile and eastern Sudan, all living here in small, scattered bands. A branch of the Nilo-Sahelians fused with the West Africans, creating a newer West African race, while from those who stayed behind, the Nilotes emerge. During the Ice Age, Centrafrica was a paradise with abundant food. More so when climatic shifts around 14,000 years ago transformed the Sahara into a vast savanna. But all things must pass, and 5,000 years ago the Sahara steadily dried up over decades and centuries, returning to the great desert it is now. Peoples had to find greener pastures in the meantime. Sudanians and Ubangians. American linguist Joseph Greenberg did groundbreaking work making sense of Africa's 1,000 to 2,000 languages. Niger-Congo was the largest family, dominating West, Central, and Southern Africa, followed by Nilo-Saharan of the Upper Nile and Chad basins. While they look good on a map, the unity of each has been disputed, especially Nilo-Saharan. Nevertheless, the genetics of each group indicate if their languages aren't all related, their speakers certainly are. By the time the Sahara began drying, the Nilotes had diverged into various families. The Maban might have been the original inhabitants of the eastern Shari basin, where they still remain. Nilotes from further east, the central Sudanians of the Bahr al-Ghazal, broke into 2 groups, forsaking their once green home around 4,000 years ago. Besides those who stayed behind, the eastern branch went to the upper Wele River in Congo, while the western advanced towards the Shari River, disrupting the peoples already there. The central Sudanians advanced as far south as the edge of the Shari lowlands. These peoples had acquired cattle, sheep, and goats from the Levant in the distant past, when there was better pasture in North Africa. But to the west, farmers came across the savannah, bearing that African kit of millet, sorghum, and other crops. These newcomers either descended from the Benue River farmers or learned their ways. In either case, they began in the upper Sanaga and spread along the Ubangi River and Shari uplands, becoming the Ubangians. In their wake, they left pockets of pygmies, mainly in the swamps along the Sangha River. These people would soon adopt an Ubangian language, colored with their own original words, and become the Baka, while a small outpost by the Lobaye River became the Bofi. In the upper West Logone, the Cameroonian savannas peoples just edge into Centrafrica. Compared to Congo and Cameroon, the Central African Republic's ethnic diversity is lesser. By the dawn of the Christian era, our boys start to split up. The Sanaga, Lobaye, and Sangha Ubangians become the Gubaya. Those north of the upper Ubangi, the Banda, the Ngbandi south, and the Zandi in the Ubangi's headwaters. Centrafrica's Maban people become the Aiki, minding their own business, holding on where they can along the Bahr Auk River. The Central Sudanians split into the Kara at the headwaters of the Bahr Auk, the Kaba of the lower Bahr Auk, and the Western Central Sudanians, who, having been cleaved by migrating Chadians in what is now Chad, become the Sara people in Central Africa. Confusingly, the Kaba people are also referred to as Sara, and there is a dialect of Sara called Kaba, but these aren't related. We'll stick with the terms I use here. The Savanians here become the Mbum people. Sometime later, the Sara split west to east into the Ngambai of the Lagone, the Doba of the Uam, and the Sara proper in the main Shari. The Mbum likewise become the Karang in the Vina River and the Mbum proper in the Mebere River. At the turn of the millennium, along the Lubaye River, the Gabaya split into the true Gabaya and their close relatives, the Manza. You know, I just realized this is our first country on the African mainland without much of a Bantu presence. In fact, a few Bantu languages are spoken in the southwest, mainly by a group of Baka who adopted a Ngiri language as the Aka. For trade, all these people used a simplified form of Umbandi that evolved into the Sango language. Sultanate of Dar al-Kuti. Ironically located at the intersection of the Saharan trade, the West African empires, and the Congolese kingdoms, Central Africa remained remote from all three for much of history. Ivory and slaves were abundant enough on the coast, but by the 19th century, the Muslim sultans of Bagirmi and Wadai began looking for more slaving grounds in the Upper Shari. Sultan Muhammad Sabun of Wadai established the vassal state of Darunga between the Azum and Auk rivers to anchor his control around 1810. Dynastic shenanigans followed after Sabun's death in 1815. A disgraced Bagirmi prince, Jugultum, fled to Darunga in 1826. There, the ruler Sultan Boker sent him to Al-Kuti, the jungle, to command slave raids in 1830. Thus, Jugultum became the new Sultan of Dar al-Kuti, the House of the Jungle, Boker's vassal. Located south of the Auk, Dar al-Kuti was a small kingdom, but still terrorized the Ubangians with horses and guns. But relations fluctuated, and Sultan Kobur eased the slaving operations in the 1860s, leading to limited cultural exchange. Some powerful Zandi chieftains apparently adopted the title of Sultan, though their domains never became very extensive. Little did Dar al-Kuti know, their slave raids would invite the attention of people who heretofore ignored the deep interior of the continent. Europeans. Ubangi-Shari. Before the 19th century, European interest in Africa was restricted to narrow colonies along the coasts. Restless natives and vicious diseases kept them close to the sea. But the latter half of the long century saw technology overcome these obstacles, and the dark continent of Africa excited the European imagination. One point was the ending of slavery, one of the justifications for the establishment of the Congo Society, back in Congo-Kinshasa's episode. Italian-born French explorer Pierre de Brazza did a little slave-busting on his own expeditions to the Congo River. The Berlin Conference was drawn up to prevent any wars over territory in Africa, and parcels were divvied up amongst participants. Germany got Cameroon, Britain was creeping down from Egypt, and the Congo Free State got the lion's share of the Congo Basin. France's presence in Brazzaville enabled her to claim the right banks of the Congo and Ubangi in 1885, up to where rapids made further travel difficult. In 1887, France and the Congo Free State extended their border up the Ubangi to the 4th degree north latitude due east. 1889, the city of Bangui was founded just downriver from those rapids, named after the river, named after the word for rapids in Bangui, a language not spoken in Central Africa but in Congo. Go figure. 1891, France formally annexes Ubangi to their colony of Gabon and the Congo, bringing the Zandi sultans into their fold. 1893, trouble stirs in the north when Sudanese warlord Rabi Az-Zubair conquers Lake Chad, soon following it up with conquering Darunga. Sultan Kobur of Dar al-Kuti got off easy as Az-Zubair's vassal. Rabi's slaving empire, of course, attracted France's attention, and they found their humanitarian mission in harmony with their ambition of expanding into the Sudan and Sahel. 1894, they claimed the Chad Basin, hoping to link their possessions in West and Central Africa. The Congo Free State was creeping northwards into Ubangi and secured an outlet to the Nile. In exchange for allowing this lease, France got a more definitive border, though had to retreat a bit. It ran along the Ubangi and then the Umbomu rivers. Now, back in 1881, Egyptian control of the Upper Nile was shattered by an Islamic movement called Mahdism, led by Muhammad Ahmad. That'll have to wait until Sudan's video, but the war meant Sudan was up for grabs. Just as Cecil Rhodes and Britain wanted to extend British control from Cape to Cairo, France wanted to extend their reach from Dakar in Senegal all the way to Djibouti in French Somaliland. 1897, they established a protectorate over Dar al-Kuti and organized an expedition to trek across and conquer all the land between Brazzaville and Djibouti. It was a race to conquer Sudan before Britain and Egypt. Captain Jean-Baptiste Marchand reached Fashoda in 1898, but by then it was too late. A short standoff between Britain and France ended when the French had no choice but to withdraw, causing discontent at home. Shortly afterwards, both countries agreed to their boundary, effective 1899. It travels north along the watershed divide of the Nile and Ubangi, then the Shari, before going northwest along some lines to the eastern edge of Lake Tizi. This ensured Anglo-Egyptian control over Darfur. The next year, in 1900, with the defeat and death of Rabah az-Zubair at the Battle of Kuseri, France was free to annex the Shari Basin as the military territory of the Chad. The French had at least managed to connect their western and equatorial African colonies. In 1903, likely due to how remote this northern region was, France split off Ubangi-Shari, originally north of the divide between the Lobaye and the rest of Ubangi. Its first capital was Abira, where the Mbomu and Dwele meet. 1906, Chad is demilitarized and rolled into the colony as Ubangi-Shari Chad, centered first at Fort Posel, but then they just moved it back to Bangui. 1908, as the scramble for Africa was just about over, France and Germany drew their borders. Up the Sangha River, up the Niue River, northwest along a line to a small stream called the Baturi, down to the Kadei River, up a bit to follow the Bumba River, across to the Kadei again, along some lines to the Lom River, along more lines to the Ngu River, down the Mbere River, then further up into Chad. Note that this border is not entirely inside Ubangi-Shari Chad. This gave Germany sparsely populated jungle south of the Sanaga River. Germany was about to get more in 1911 with the conclusion of the Agadir crisis in Morocco. In exchange for giving France free rein in Morocco, Germany got more land for Cameroon, pushing the border east to the Likwala al-Arbe River, north to a line to the Mpoko River, north to meet the Lagone border. Noi Cameroon gave Germany access to the Congo. France coped by annexing Dar al-Kuti that year. French Equatorial Africa. The year before, in 1910, France organized Gabon, Middle Congo, and Ubangi-Shari Chad into the Federation of Equatorial Africa to consolidate its power. Centered in Brazzaville, Ubangi and the Chad Basin were remote and often neglected. Just like in Congo, France employed a company concession scheme to spur development, giving large swaths of land to colonial companies, most prominent the Company of the Upper Ubangi Sultanates. And just like in the Congo Free State and French Congo, the methods companies employed to keep the rubber and cotton plantations running amounted to brutal mutilations, executions, and other atrocities. Following World War I, Noi Cameroon was reacquired by France, as was Cameroon in 1919. Now that Chad had calmed down, it was separated from Ubangi-Shari as the fourth colony of Equatorial Africa in 1920. Starting at the Mbere River, the border hops along some small rivers, the Lebe, the Warawasi, then the Ereke until it meets the Pende, then down to go up the Taibo River, across to the Bokola River, then down the Nanabaria. Where it joins the Wam, the border jumps east across some lines to the Petit Sido River, then the Grand Sido River, then the Shari itself, upriver along the Auk, continuing to when it becomes the Aukale, and finishing at Lake Tizi. This kept the populous Shari lowlands in Chad, while the hills remained in Ubangi-Shari. In fact, this border seems to have gone through adjustments until World War II, but I couldn't find any good descriptions of those, so the modern one will suffice. In 1928, widespread Gubaya revolt, the Congo-Wara Rebellion, took place over the forced labor on the Congo Ocean Railway. Tens of thousands were killed during this oppression, ending in 1931. 1929, the border with Middle Congo was adjusted, adding the Labaye Valley. 1937, the Kadei and Mambere north of Nola were added. These are Gubaya inhabited lands north of the remote Sangha swamp jungle, better ruled from Bangui than Brazzaville. 1940, the fall of France saw Ubangi-Shari become part of Free France. agreed under promises of political and economic reform. By 1946, the final border with Middle Congo was drawn. The watershed divide of the Lobaya and Ibenga rivers, west through that between the Ubangi and Sanga rivers, thence southwest along a line to the Sanga itself just upriver from Bomassa, creating Ubangi-Shari's little spur. Just in time for the 1946 French Constitution to take effect, rebranding a French empire of colonies as a French union of territories, giving them all French citizenship and limited autonomy. Catholic priest Barthélemy Boganda was elected to represent Ubangi-Shari in the French National Assembly, and soon became leader of the territory's political organizations. The 1958 French referendum, held in response to the ongoing war in Algeria, gave the territories the choice of joining France, becoming autonomous republics, or remaining territories. The majority of French Africa, including Ubangi-Shari, chose the second option. Equatorial Africa was also dissolved, its constituents becoming the republics of Gabon, Congo, Chad, and Central African Republic. With the USA and USSR, the UN, and the people of the colonies all calling for decolonization around the world, France tried to save face by creating the French Community, a federated successor to their union. But it soon became clear this was merely a prelude to independence. Boganda became president of the new Ubangi-Shari, but in the lead-up to Republican government, he did his best to organize a meeting amongst the former French Equatorial Africa. Boganda was worried that a decolonized and divided Africa would become pawns in the global game of the Cold War. In the vein of Simón Bolívar's Gran Colombia, Boganda wanted to forge a union of Romance-speaking Africa, including the former French territories, Belgian Congo and Rwanda-Urundi, Equatorial Guinea, and Angola. This grand idea might have positioned these United States of Latin Africa as a major power free to choose her own destiny. But like Bolivar's Congress of Panama, none of Ubangi-Shari's peers were interested, more concerned about their own affairs. Boganda, still holding on to his dream, wanted Ubangi-Shari to be the first in a line of dominoes towards African unification. He therefore named the new country La République Centrafricaine, the Central African Republic, keeping options open for expansion and consolidation. Boganda drafted a constitution and began devising economic and administrative reforms throughout the country, but he also took steps to ensure his continued political dominance. Sadly, in 1959, Boganda and 8 other people were killed in an aircraft incident on a French airline. French investigation findings were never published, but a news article alleged explosives had been found in the wreckage. Conspiracies abound whether this was deliberate and who might have been involved. Perhaps the French government was afraid of losing a quisling in Africa. Maybe French expats in the country were worried what Boganda's presidency would mean for them. Maybe Boganda's political opponents saw an opportunity. Or, possibly, all three conspired. David Dacko succeeded as president, overseeing independence August 13, 1960. Shortly afterwards, Dacko declared a one-party state. He transformed Central Africa into a diamond state, as gems became the country's most important export, but also rewarded his cronies with government positions. Corruption and deficit spending increased in hand with a bloated state bureaucracy. Economic downturn and cozying up with the Chinese communists didn't do Dacko any favors, and neither did concurrent civil wars in Congo-Kinshasa and Sudan. Dacko's time was up when Colonel Jean Bedel Bokassa led a coup in 1966 to save the Central African Republic from nepotism, cronyism, and communism. Bokassa dissolved the National Assembly, becoming a moralistic military dictator, officially president for life in 1972. In 1976, Bokassa got Napoleon on the mind and declared a Central African empire with himself as emperor, spending an obscene amount of public money on the coronation. He felt it would help his country attract glory and respect, and indulge his ego, but none of this actually improved the conditions in the country, and 1979 riots led to death and France feeling a change was needed. Operation Caban was a go later that year, when French forces aided a coup against Bokassa, restoring David Dacko to power. The Central African Empire quickly returned to a republic, the would-be emperor dying in obscurity just like his inspiration. Dacko may have been better for France, but he was not better for the Central African Republic, though Bokassa didn't leave him much to work with. He fell out of favor, though, and in 1981 was overthrown again by General André Kolingba with French support. Kolingba became another military dictator, though limited democracy was allowed starting in 1985, and Sango was co-official with French. The end of the Cold War and French support meant democracy was back in fashion. Ange-Philippe Patessé won the 1993 presidential election, but quickly began cracking down on Ubangi people, Kolingba's folk. A failed 2001 coup led to a successful 2003 coup, General Francois Bozize taking power. Anti-Bozize rebels fought the Central African Bush War between 2004 and 2007. After a time of peace, 2012, Seleka, frustrated over the marginalization of the country's Muslim minority, began a new civil war. They captured Bangui in 2013. Sekela's leader, Michel Djotodia, became president, but he resigned in 2014 in favor of Catherine Samba Panza. Didn't matter much, as government control had essentially evaporated outside Bangui, as the country devolved into warring states, warlords carving out their own fiefs. Faustin Archange Touadéra won the election in 2016 and has remained in office since. The Central African Republic civil war continues to rage. The central government controls major cities, buttressed by the Russian Wagner Group, Rwandan soldiers, and UN peacekeepers. North and East rebel factions rule, alleged to have support from Chad and Sudan. As you can imagine, this war has not been good for the Republic. Fighting and atrocities have killed thousands, displaced millions. Despite abundant resources and arable land, poverty in the war-torn Central African Republic is among the highest in the entire world. Warlords exploit their conquered resources to fund their regimes, causing deforestation in the country. Park rangers manage to protect the Chinko Nature Reserve in the east, like Dunedain rangers keeping the king's peace long after the kingdom has died away. The Central African Republic is not a nice place to be right now, and the only way that'll change is if the fighting stops. And for that, I think, someone has to win. But on that note, we're done with Central Africa. I'm gonna kind of miss it. We could move north to Chad, which many consider part of Central Africa. I have it here as part of West Africa. You can decide for yourself. But next time instead, I'd like to go to East Africa, starting with Tanzania. See you there.